I still remember standing in the empty living room of my new house holding a set of keys. I was 32 years old and completely exhausted from weeks of packing and moving. I stared down at a thick stack of mortgage documents resting on the kitchen counter. Those papers said I owed $300,000 over the next 30 years. I felt a heavy knot forming in my stomach. Right at that exact moment, the air conditioning unit kicked on. It immediately started making a loud, grinding noise that echoed through the empty hallway. I did not even have my couch unloaded yet, and I was already looking at a $2,000 repair bill. What I did not know at the time was that this grinding noise was just the opening act. I had signed up for a financial trap that would take me years to figure out. My name is Michael, and I spend way too much time obsessing over the hidden costs of the American dream. If you are someone who feels like you are doing everything right but still falling behind, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Because today, I'm not talking about how to win a bidding war or how to pick the best neighborhood. I want to talk about the biggest financial lie we are sold about building wealth. I want to talk about how the house you live in might actually be keeping you broke. And I know it because I have been exactly where you are standing right now. For years, I believed what everyone told me about real estate. I was earning $75,000 a year working as a marketing manager. I kept my expenses low, and I saved my money. My parents told me that renting was just throwing money away. My friends told me that buying a house was the ultimate sign of financial maturity. I believed them completely. I thought that trading my monthly rent for a mortgage payment was the smartest thing I could do. I thought I was finally building equity instead of making a landlord rich. Before I bought the house, my rent was $1,500 a month. That number covered everything. If the roof leaked, I made a phone call. If the fridge stopped working, I sent an email. My maximum financial liability for housing was capped at exactly $1,500 every single month. My new mortgage payment was $1,800. I told myself that an extra $300 a month was a small price to pay for ownership. I told myself it was an investment in my future, but I was not calculating the cost of my time, my energy, and my lost opportunities. I used to think that finally getting the keys to my own place would bring total peace of mind. Then I found a 2023 survey from Clever Real Estate showing that 93% of recent homebuyers have regrets about their purchase. I had to read that number twice. More than 9 out of 10 people who achieved the great American dream immediately felt like they had made a mistake. And standing in that hot living room, listening to my broken air conditioner, I finally understood why. We are told that a house is an asset. We are told that it is the safest place to put our money. But nobody ever sits down and shows you the true cost of keeping that physical box standing upright. Nobody shows you the math on what you actually pay versus what you actually own. When I finally sat down at my kitchen table and ran the numbers on my own life, I felt sick. I realized that my biggest asset was actually my biggest liability. The wealth I thought I was building was completely invisible, and the longer I stayed in that house, the deeper the financial hole was going to get. I did not have a name for the trap back then. When I finally went looking for answers years later, I found out it was called the Homeownership Illusion. I had been calling it the invisible money pit for months. Turns out it already had a name. It is the psychological blind spot that makes us believe every dollar we spend on a house is an investment. We are taught to look at our monthly payment and view it as a forced savings account. But the math tells a completely different story. One night, I was sitting at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning. I was staring at a property tax reassessment letter and trying to figure out how I was going to afford the increase. I started searching online for anyone who felt as trapped as I did. That is when I came across the work of a real estate researcher named Alex Avery. He wrote extensively about the wealth destruction of primary residences. He argued that your house is not an investment, but a lifestyle choice that heavily consumes capital. Reading his work felt like someone finally turning on the lights in a dark room. My journey into the illusion started exactly 30 days after I moved into the house. I received my very first mortgage statement in the mail. My total monthly payment was exactly $1,842. I eagerly opened the envelope. I was excited to see how much of my $300,000 loan I had already paid down. I looked at the printed breakdown. Out of that $1,842, only $295 went toward my principal balance. The remaining $1,547 vanished into interest, property taxes, and insurance. I sat down heavily in my dining chair. I told myself I was building equity, but I was only keeping $295 a month. The rest was gone forever. It was unrecoverable capital. It was just like my old rent payments. Except now, if the water heater exploded, I could not call the landlord. I had to pay for that out of my own pocket too. I used to think that making a mortgage payment meant I was slowly but surely owning my house from day one. Then, I found a report from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau from 2019 showing that during the first 5 years of a standard 30-year mortgage, more than 70% of your monthly payment goes strictly toward interest. I stared at the screen when I read that. For the first half of a decade, you are not really buying a house. You are just renting money from a bank, and the bank is charging you a massive premium for the privilege of holding the deed. My old rent payment of $1,500 used to feel like a complete waste, but my new $1,547 interest and tax payment was exactly the same thing. It was money leaving my bank account that I would never, ever see again. I thought I had escaped the trap of making someone else rich. Instead, I had just changed the name on the check from my local landlord to a massive national bank. I was paying a huge premium for the mere feeling of ownership. At first, I only saw this part, and I thought I understood it. I told myself the interest would eventually go down and the equity would go up over time. I thought the worst part of the math was behind me. But what I did not know was that the interest payment was actually the most predictable part of the trap. The real financial drain was hiding in plain sight, and it was about to destroy my careful monthly budget. I thought I understood how a 30-year mortgage worked. I took my $300,000 loan and divided it by 30 years in my head. I figured I was paying off $10,000 of my house every single year. But that is not how the math actually works. I logged into my online mortgage portal one Saturday morning. I found a button that said, Download Amortization Schedule. I printed out all 5 pages and laid them across my kitchen counter. I took a red pen and started circling the numbers for my first 5 years in the house. I was on a standard 30-year fixed-rate mortgage at 6% interest. My combined principal and interest payment was $1,798 a month. I looked at the breakdown for month number 1. Exactly $1,500 went straight to the bank as interest. Only $298 went toward the actual house. I looked at month number 2. The interest dropped by $1 single. The principal went up by $1 single. I was inching forward at a microscopic pace. Over my first 60 months, I would send the bank a total of $107,880. I looked at the column labeled Principal Balance at the bottom of year 5. Out of that massive pile of money, only $20,700 actually went toward owning my physical house. The other $87,100 was pure interest profit for the bank. I stared at the red circles on the paper. I was paying almost $90,000 in fees just to borrow the money for 5 years. I used to think that as long as I kept making my monthly payments, I was building wealth that I could cash out later. Then I found a 2023 report from the National Association of Realtors showing that the average American homeowner actually sells their house and moves after just 10 years. I sat back in my chair and thought about what that really meant. Most people never actually reach the back half of their 30-year loan where the principal finally starts getting paid down in large chunks. They buy a house. They spend 10 years paying maximum interest to the bank. Then they sell the house, take out a new 30-year loan, and start the interest trap all over again from day one. They reset the clock on their own financial progress without even realizing it. I looked at my own life. I was 32 years old. The chances of me staying in this exact house until I was 62 were basically zero. I was going to be one of those people. I was trapped in the most expensive years of the loan. When I was renting, my friends used to tell me I was paying someone else's mortgage. But looking at that schedule, I realized I was just paying the bank's profit margin instead. The equity I was supposedly building was moving at a crawl. If I wanted to sell the house in 5 years, the standard 6% realtor fees and closing costs would completely wipe out that tiny $20,000 of equity I had scraped together. I would walk away with absolutely nothing to show for half a decade of payments. The bank was winning the game. I was taking all the risk of ownership, and they were taking all the guaranteed cash. But when I dug deeper, I found something that most people never notice. Because the interest was just the cost of the money, I still had to pay the cost of the physical land. And the local government was about to teach me a very expensive lesson about what ownership actually means. I thought locking in a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage meant my housing costs were locked in for life. My rent used to go up every single year, and I hated it. I bought the house to freeze my monthly budget in place. But when I dug deeper, I found something that most people never notice until the bill arrives in the mail. 14 months after I moved in, I walked out to my mailbox. I pulled out 2 envelopes. One was from my county tax assessor, the other was from my home insurance company. I opened the county envelope first. They had reassessed the value of my property. Because the housing market had gone up, they decided my house was now worth $340,000. My property tax bill jumped from $4,000 a year to $5,100 a year. I opened the insurance envelope next. My annual premium was increasing from $1,200 to $1,600. I sat down at my kitchen table and added up the new numbers. My supposedly fixed mortgage payment was suddenly going up by $125 a month. I was furious. I used to think that once I locked in my fixed-rate mortgage, my monthly housing costs would never go up. Then I found a 2024 report from Bankrate showing that the average American homeowner saw their property taxes and home insurance premiums jump by more than 20% over a 2-year period. I sat there looking at my own letters. A 20% increase on the unrecoverable costs of a home could easily break a middle-class budget. My fixed costs were not fixed at all. They were completely at the mercy of inflation and extreme weather patterns. My mortgage servicer sent me a letter explaining they were adjusting my monthly escrow withdrawal. I did not have a choice. I could not negotiate. They just reached into my bank account and took more money. When I was a renter, I could at least threaten to move when the landlord raised the rent. As a homeowner, I was trapped. I could not pack up my house and move it to a cheaper tax district. I was a captive audience for the local government. I started doing the math on what I was actually paying to the government and the insurance company. Between the $5,100 in taxes and the $1,600 in insurance, I was paying $6,700 a year. That is $558 every single month. I realized this was phantom rent. Even if I paid off my entire $300,000 mortgage tomorrow, I would still owe the government and the insurance company $558 a month just to keep standing inside my own living room. If I stopped paying my mortgage, the bank would take the house. If I paid off the mortgage but stopped paying the property taxes, the county would take the house. You never actually own the land. You just rent it from the county indefinitely. And the county gets to raise your rent whenever they want to. I combined my new phantom rent with the $1,500 of interest I was paying the bank. My total unrecoverable costs were now over $2,000 a month. I was throwing away $2,000 every 30 days. Just to say I owned a home. When I was renting my old apartment, my total unrecoverable cost was exactly $1,500. By buying a house, I had actually increased the amount of money I was throwing away by $500 a month. I looked at the total numbers for a full decade. If my taxes and insurance never went up again, which was impossible, I would pay $67,000 in phantom rent over the next 10 years. Add that to the $140,000. In interest I was paying the bank over that same decade. That is over $200,000 of pure expense. $200,000 that builds absolutely zero equity. The wealth I thought I was building was an illusion created by inflation and forced savings. I felt the walls of the trap closing in around me. But even the phantom rent was just paper math that I paid through an escrow account. The real financial bleeding, the part that actually drained my checking account on a random Tuesday, was still waiting for me in the driveway. And this is the part that took me years to figure out, the part nobody tells you when they hand you the keys to the front door. During my second year in the house, I started tracking where my weekends were going. Every Saturday morning, I was waking up and driving to the big box hardware store. I was buying bags of mulch. I was buying special tools to fix a leaking pipe under the guest bathroom sink. I was replacing a broken window screen that the wind tore off. I thought I was just being a responsible homeowner. I told myself $50 here and $100 there was no big deal. Then my water heater exploded on a random Tuesday night. It completely flooded my garage. The emergency plumber charged me $1,200 just to stop the bleeding and install a new unit. I pulled out my credit card to pay him and felt my chest tighten. That was money I was supposed to put into my retirement account. I went back through my bank statements for the previous 12 months. I added up every single trip to the hardware store. I added the lawnmower and the weed whacker. I added the emergency plumber. I added the random light fixtures, the air filters, and the pest control guy. The total was $4,100. I used to think that maintenance was just a rare emergency you saved a little extra for. Then I found a 2023 report from Angie showing that the average American homeowner spends $3,800 a year on routine maintenance alone, not including major emergency repairs. I stared at that number on my screen. That was over $300 a month, just to keep the physical structure of the house from actively deteriorating. That is when I learned about the 1% rule. It is a real estate standard that says you should expect to spend 1% of your home value every single year on maintenance and repairs. My house was worth $340,000. That meant the math demanded $3,400 a year, every year, forever, just to maintain the exact same house I already bought. If you do not spend that money, the house rots. The roof gets older. The heating system gets closer to dying. The wood siding peels and rots. A house is not a passive asset sitting safely in a bank vault. It is a decaying physical structure exposed to the weather. It constantly consumes cash and human labor just to stand still. I took out a blank piece of paper and added this new $300 a month to my unrecoverable costs. I was paying $1,500 in interest to the bank. I was paying $558 in phantom rent for taxes and insurance. And now I was paying roughly $300 in mandatory maintenance. My total unrecoverable housing cost was $2,358 every single month. When I was renting my old apartment, my total unrecoverable cost was exactly $1,500. Buying this house was costing me $858 more every single month in pure, evaporated cash. I was bleeding over $10,000 a year in extra living expenses just for the privilege of calling myself a homeowner. The trap was completely closed. I was working 40 hours a week just to pay the bank, the local government, and the hardware store. But the heaviest realization was still coming. Because the real tragedy was not just the money I was losing every month. It was what that extra $858 could have become if I had never signed that mortgage in the first place. I opened a blank spreadsheet on my laptop. I needed to see the actual math over a lifetime. I needed to compare the path I was on against the path I had walked away from. I typed in the numbers for the house I actually bought. I had put down $60,000 as a 20% down payment over 30 years. A $300,000 house, growing at a historical average of 3% a year, would eventually be worth about $728,000. When people sell their paid-off houses for $700,000, they feel rich. They think they made a massive profit. But I started subtracting the hidden costs from that final number. Over those 30 years, I would pay the bank roughly $340,000 in pure interest. I would pay the local government over $150,000 in property taxes. I would pay the hardware store and the plumbers another $100,000 in maintenance. When I subtracted the interest, the taxes, the insurance, and the repairs, my actual profit was almost zero. The house was basically a forced savings account with terrible returns and massive fees. Then I built the second column in my spreadsheet. I created the alternative reality. What if I had never signed that mortgage? What if I had stayed in my $1,500 a month apartment? I took the $60,000 I used for a down payment and mathematically dropped it into an S&P 500 index fund. Then I looked at the extra $858 a month I was currently bleeding into the house through unrecoverable costs. I pretended I took that exact amount and invested it into the stock market every single month. I dragged the spreadsheet cells down to simulate 10 years. Assuming a historical average return of 8% a year, the investment account would hold $280,000 after a single decade. I dragged the cells down to 20 years. The compound interest started doing the heavy lifting. The account crossed $780,000. Then I dragged the cells down to year 30. The final number at the bottom of the column was $1.8 million. I sat back and stared at the glowing screen in my dark kitchen. I looked at the two completely different financial futures. Path A was my current reality. A paid-off house worth $728,000 that still required property taxes and maintenance until the day I died. Path B was the renter reality. $1.8 million sitting in liquid accessible index funds, generating enough dividends to pay my rent forever. The gap between the two paths was over $1 million in lost wealth. That was the opportunity cost of buying a house. That was the price I was paying to impress my friends and follow the standard American script. I felt a wave of complete panic wash over me. I had locked up my entire net worth in a single, illiquid physical asset that was actively draining my monthly cash flow. I had willingly traded a $1.8 million future for a wooden box that needed a new roof. The math was entirely one-sided. It was not even close. Renting and investing the difference completely destroyed the financial returns of homeownership. But as I sat there staring at the undeniable math, a terrible question crept into my mind. If the numbers were this clear, why did I feel like such a failure when I was renting? And why was the entire financial system designed to make me feel that way? I knew the math was undeniable. But staring at that spreadsheet, I realized something dark about human nature. We do not buy houses with calculators. We buy them with our egos. I thought back to the year before I bought the house. I was at a dinner party with 3 of my college friends. They were all homeowners. They spent 20 minutes complaining about property taxes and broken water heaters. But when I mentioned I was still renting my apartment, the entire table went completely silent. One of them looked at me with genuine pity. He said I was just throwing my money away. He said I was paying my landlord's mortgage. That was the exact phrase. The phrase the entire real estate industry has spent billions of dollars burning into our brains. I felt embarrassed. I felt like I was falling behind in the game of life. That single moment of social shame overrode years of careful saving. That is when I finally understood why I kept getting stuck even when I knew the right answer. I used to think that buying a house was purely a financial decision based on logic and math. Then, I found a 2022 survey from Zillow showing that almost 75% of millennial homebuyers reported being heavily motivated by the fear of missing out and peer pressure. I had to stop and breathe when I read that. 3/4 of an entire generation were making the largest financial decision of their lives because they were terrified of looking like failures compared to their friends. The psychological trap of homeownership relies heavily on this exact social pressure. And it pairs that pressure perfectly with the concept of forced savings. The financial system knows that most people lack the discipline to take $858 every single month and manually invest it into an index fund. If you leave that money in a checking account, most people will spend it on a nicer car or a vacation. So the banks created a product that forces you to save money by attaching a massive penalty if you fail. If you do not pay your mortgage, you lose your home and your credit score is destroyed. It is a brilliant psychological mechanism. It forces the middle class to build a tiny bit of wealth through sheer terror. The real estate industry exploits this fear beautifully. I remember sitting in my mortgage broker's office the day I got pre-approved. He slid a shiny brochure across the desk. He smiled and told me that renting was 100% interest. He deliberately left out the phantom rent of property taxes. He left out the unrecoverable costs of insurance and loan origination fees. He left out the weekend trips to the hardware store. He played on my fear of missing out and my desire for social status, and I fell for it completely. I bought a $300,000 anchor because I wanted to post a picture on social media proving I was a successful adult. I willingly stepped into the trap because society told me the trap was a trophy. I was paying a massive premium just to avoid the stigma of being a renter. My ego was literally costing me $1 million over 30 years. But as I stared at my spreadsheet, a loud voice in my head started arguing back. I could hear my parents' voices. I could hear my friends from the dinner party. Let me say out loud the objection that is forming in your head right now, because it used to form in mine every single time someone tried to warn me about this. When someone first explained this to me, my immediate reaction was anger. I thought they were completely out of touch with reality. Let me say out loud the objection that is forming in your head right now, because it used to form in mine every single time someone tried to warn me about this. I know exactly what you are thinking. You are telling yourself that renting is throwing 100% of your money away. You are telling yourself that at least with a house, you eventually get your money back when you sell it. You believe it is a piggy bank you can live inside. I pushed back against the math for years, using this exact argument. I desperately wanted the house to be the right choice because I had already signed the paperwork. But here is what I spent years not understanding. We have to define what throwing money away actually means. When you rent an apartment, yes, your monthly payment is 100% unrecoverable capital. It is gone forever. But when you buy a house, you are also paying massive amounts of unrecoverable capital. Mortgage interest is gone forever. Property taxes are gone forever. Homeowners insurance premiums are gone forever. The money you pay the plumber to fix the water heater is gone forever. The 6% fee you pay the real estate agent when you finally sell the house is gone forever. I used to think that the equity I was building would always outpace the fees I was paying. Then, I found a 2021 working paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research showing that over a standard homeownership cycle, the total unrecoverable costs of buying often equal or exceed the total cost of renting a similar property. I read that conclusion and felt the floor drop out from under me. The smartest economists in the world were looking at the exact same data I was. And they were coming to the exact same conclusion. When I finally broke down my own numbers side by side, the truth was humiliating. My old rent was throwing away $1,500 a month. My new house was throwing away $2,358 a month in pure, unrecoverable costs. I was not saving money by owning. I was actually throwing away $858 more every single month just for the privilege of painting my own walls and fixing my own roof. The counterintuitive truth is that your primary residence is almost never a good investment. It is a highly leveraged lifestyle consumption choice. You are choosing to consume a specific neighborhood, a specific school district, and a specific amount of square footage. And you are paying a massive premium to the bank and the government for that consumption. Once I finally accepted that, the anger faded. It was replaced by a massive sense of relief. Because if a house was just a lifestyle choice, that meant I could choose a different lifestyle. That was the moment everything changed for me. I realized I could not just sit in my living room and complain about my property taxes anymore. I needed a way to separate my housing needs from my wealth building strategy. I needed a plan to take control of the math. The first thing I did was sit down and completely change how I viewed my primary residence. I stopped calling my house an investment. I started calling it exactly what it was: a very expensive lifestyle choice. That mental shift was massive for me. It allowed me to look at the math without feeling defensive or guilty. The second step I took was building a ruthless audit of my true housing costs. I did not just look at my monthly mortgage payment. I tracked every single dollar that left my bank account to keep that physical structure standing. I tracked the phantom rent of my property taxes and my insurance. I tracked the routine maintenance. I added it all up and wrote the final number on a sticky note. My total unrecoverable cost was $2,358 a month in pure evaporated cash. I took that sticky note and put it on my bathroom mirror. I needed to see it every single morning. I needed to remind myself that my house was a consumption item, not a wealth generator. I used to think that tracking housing expenses this closely was something only accountants did. Then I found a 2023 survey from the Financial Planning Association showing that fewer than 15% of American homeowners actually know their total annual unrecoverable housing costs. I shook my head when I read that. 85% of people are blindly bleeding wealth into their drywall and their local property tax office without ever calculating the exact dollar amount. I refuse to be in that blind majority anymore. The third thing I changed was how I handled any extra money that came into my life. Before I did the math, if I got a raise or a bonus at work, My first instinct was to upgrade the house. I would think about remodeling the guest bathroom or putting in a new stone patio. I thought I was adding permanent value to my investment. But once I knew the truth about unrecoverable costs, I completely stopped putting extra capital into the physical box. When my annual $3,000 bonus cleared my checking account that year, I did not go to the hardware store. I opened a separate brokerage account and bought $3,000 worth of S&P 500 index funds. I intentionally separated my shelter from my wealth building. Shelter is something you consume to keep the rain off your head. Wealth is something that pays you while you sleep. I finally accepted that my house was never going to pay me, so I stopped treating it like a piggy bank. When I looked at my brokerage account a few months later, I saw my first dividend payment. It was only $45, but it was money that came to me without me doing any physical work. My house had never paid me a single dollar. It had only ever demanded dollars from me. By redirecting that one single $3,000 bonus away from a bathroom remodel and into the stock market, I secured a completely liquid asset. Over 30 years at an 8% return, that single decision alone is mathematically worth over $30,000. But auditing my unrecoverable costs and redirecting my bonus was only the beginning. I still had a massive mortgage and a house that was eating my monthly cash flow. I had to make a much harder decision about the physical box I was actually living in. And what I did next completely changed the trajectory of my financial life. The fourth step I took was the hardest decision I have ever made. I called a real estate agent and I listed my house for sale. I had only lived there for 4 years. When the paperwork finally closed, the 6% agent commissions and the closing costs wiped out almost all of my equity. I walked away with my original down payment and barely a few $1,000s in profit. My friends thought I was completely crazy. They asked me why I was giving up on the American dream. But I was not giving up. I was escaping a math equation that I was guaranteed to lose. I moved back into a rented apartment. My new rent was exactly $1,800 a month. That covered everything. The property taxes, the homeowner's insurance, the maintenance, and the roof. It was all the landlord's problem again. My total unrecoverable housing costs dropped from $2,358 a month down to $1,800. I instantly freed up $558 in my monthly budget. The final step I took was automating that exact difference. I set up an automatic transfer for $558 to leave my checking account on the first of every month. That money goes straight into my brokerage account and buys an S&P 500 index fund. I do not even have to think about it. I ran the lifetime math on this new reality. If I keep investing that exact amount for the next 26 years to finish out what would have been my 30-year mortgage, the numbers are incredible. At an 8% historical average return, that automated monthly transfer will grow into over $630,000 of pure liquid wealth. That is cash I can access instantly on my phone. I do not have to ask a bank for permission. I do not have to take out a home equity loan or wait for a buyer. I used to think that going back to renting meant giving up my financial security forever. Then I found a 2024 study from the Center for Economic and Policy Research showing that renters who aggressively invest the difference in housing costs routinely build liquid wealth portfolios up to 40% larger than identical homeowners over a 30-year period. I smiled when I read that conclusion. The math finally proved what I was feeling in my gut. I was no longer the one falling behind. The truth is, a house is just a physical box made of wood and drywall. It is a place to sleep and keep your things dry. It is not a magical wealth machine, and it should never be your primary retirement plan. Real financial freedom is not being tied down to a physical location that constantly demands your cash and your weekends. Freedom is having liquid assets that give you options when life changes. I finally feel rich today because my money works for me, instead of me working for a house. If this video helped you see your finances differently, I want you to hit that like button and subscribe. Every video I make is something I wish someone had told me years earlier. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.